While there has been fighting in Lashkar Gah in recent days, other parts of the Helmand province are firmly under Taliban control. Only 20 kilometers separate the city of Kandahar from the strongholds of the Taliban. We drove past signs of recent battles. Arriving in the town of Gereshk, the Taliban fighter asks us to get out of our car. At first sight, things here do not look different from the government-controlled areas. But then you see the Taliban fighters, the only ones allowed to use radio handsets. Our escorts tell us there is no telephone service or internet for security reasons. In the town, you see Taliban flags everywhere. Shopkeepers say it's a sign of their allegiance to the movement.
We noticed a clear change. Before, the villagers could not come to the market. Now they can, and the markets are crowded. The women can shop, and there's nothing to bother them.
We spoke to one of the shop's customers as well.
Before the Taliban, it was difficult for us to live under the authority of the government. Now we are free. Our children feed us, and we're safe.
Throughout our visit, we were escorted by Taliban representatives. The older people we spoke to tend to praise the Taliban and its role in providing security. They welcome the implementation of Islamic law in the very conservative southern Afghanistan. But away from the camera, some young men did not hide their resentment at the absence of telephone and internet services and their fear of a lack of freedom in the future. At the district hospital, it is business as usual. In this ward, 600 babies were born during last month, the period that the Taliban has been in control.
Since the arrival of the Taliban, there has been no change in our plans. We were received by the health officials, and they told me not to change anything. There is a unified health law, and we were asked to abide by it.
At this checkpoint and the points like it, the Taliban controls things on the ground, while letting the Afghan government rules the skies. And while the Taliban says it wants and even seeks peace, its fighters say they are ready for all possibilities. For now, they are conducting policing duties, but they know a new battle could be looming.
We prefer that there be a peaceful solution to the conflict and the current crisis in Afghanistan. If the government side insists on fighting and does not commit to reconciliation, the next step will be to attack the state capitals.
Electricity in the area is provided by this nearby dam, built by the Soviets and restored by the Americans. Like everything else in this town of 70,000 people, for now, it's run by the Taliban. Younes, Yassine, Jazeera, Gereshk, Helmand province, Afghanistan.
Ahmed Shuja Jamal is head of international affairs at Afghanistan's Office of the National Security Council. He says Taliban fighters are making gains, at least in part, thanks to support from neighbouring Pakistan.
The truth is that the Taliban have received men, weapons and explosives, but also direction from across our southern frontiers, which is Pakistan. That is why they're able to put up such stiff resistance across the country. If you focus on a given sliver of time at any given moment, a province may have fallen under the Taliban's control, but I think the situation remains completely fluid, which means that as we are speaking, the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces are actually rallying and pushing the Taliban out of the province of Kunduz. Similar action is happening in Shibra Khan, and similar action is also happening in Saripur, two of the other provinces that you listed as having fallen into the Taliban's hands.
Well, we also interviewed Suhail Shaheen, the Taliban's international media spokesman. He says they do want peace, but government aggression has forced them to fight.
Our response is clear. We want a peaceful solution of the Afghan issue. For that, we waited for them for the last 1 year, but unfortunately, you may have seen that the head of the Kabul administration on the day of Eid, he announced a military strategy for 3 months and 6 months. And after that, they started bombing cities, hospitals, clinics, schools.
Well, the US government watchdog for Afghanistan is calling the Taliban advance an existential crisis for the government. Its latest report says Afghan security forces, quotes, appeared surprised and unready as foreign forces withdrew. The agency has been tracking up to $2 trillion of US taxpayer money spent during the conflict. We're talking about a period of 20 years. Hundreds of billions have been spent to train and equip Afghan security forces, which number around 300,000. But experts say that figure is inflated because of corruption and absenteeism, and huge stockpiles of weapons have ended up in the hands of the Taliban. UN monitors estimate the Taliban has 75,000 fighters and has made significant profits from controlling the heroin trade. Let's talk now to David Desroches. He's Professor of National Defence University and he served in Afghanistan. He joins us on Skype from Washington. David, good to have your thoughts here on the NewsHour again. If the warlords had been extracted from the equation that was Afghanistan, say 10 or 20 years ago, would what we're seeing today not be happening?
I think that's a good question, and I think that's the nub of it. So I served in Afghanistan 2002, 2003 on the Civil Affairs Task Force, and quite frankly, what I saw was a military effort that was focused on Kabul with very little done in the provinces, and basically the warlords retained a lot of power even while the central government sought to move out there. I think part of the reason why the situation looks so bad is that the warlords, who really have a lot of the fighting power in these provinces, are stepping back, waiting for the central government to reach a point of crisis where they empower the individual warlords, and then they'll move in. I think that's probably the case in Kunduz, in Saripol, and in Talakwan.
The Taliban is clearly playing to its strengths, if you will, in its heartland, in the bits of Afghanistan that we've associated the Taliban with in the context of Afghanistan for, what, more than a generation now. But it's also taking other areas, apparently. That's what we're seeing unfolding almost hour to hour. How much of a surprise is that?
Well, so it's not a surprise that Lashkar Gah is, kind of under Taliban. That's always been hardcore Taliban land. When you look at Zaranj province, that's Baluch and Durrani Pakhtuns. The Taliban is overwhelmingly a Pashtun movement. And so areas that have large Pashtun populations like Kunduz province, you can see them active there. But it's also important to bear in mind, the Taliban's not as unitary as we think it is. Everybody who has a beef with the central government in Afghanistan calls themselves Taliban to get attention and to, quite frankly, frighten and demoralize their opponents. So I think that a lot of this success we're seeing here for the Taliban will be fleeting. It will be very hard to sustain. Basically, what they're doing right now is disrupting and attacking an overextended central government force. And I think that once there's a little bit of a consolidation and a counterattack, we'll see the Taliban sort of move into its heartland on the Pakistan border areas and in the Pashtun heartlands.
Does what you've just said, David, therefore partly explain the relationship where it is at the moment between the Pakistani Taliban and the Afghan Taliban? Because my understanding of the Pakistani Taliban was it was distinctly a different organization operating under the same name. But if the Pakistani Taliban is giving the Afghan Taliban either real or tacit support, doesn't that mean that the Afghan Taliban is in effect opening that border that it controls between Afghanistan and Pakistan to allow Pakistani Taliban fighters to cross and to work with the Afghan Taliban?
That's a really good question. So the amount of Pakistani influence in Afghanistan is something that, we've never quite put our finger on. There's clearly in the early days, you saw people coming out of Pakistani madrasas fighting in Afghanistan, and Lord knows, also like exiled Uzbek militant organizations, things of that nature. I think that all things being equal, the Taliban, whether they're Afghan or Pakistan, these are people who oppose central government in either country and are happy to capitalize off an opportunity. I don't think that there's a formal command and control structure. I think it's a transactional relationship, and I think that right now there's also the ability to seize customs revenues and to seize control of the narcotics trade. So there's a lot of impetus for people to attack the Afghan central government right now, but I don't think it's the basis of a lasting military-like organization.
Afghanistan fell to the Taliban in 1996 after 20 years of war and conflict, when there was a vacuum, a different kind of vacuum, but a vacuum all the same. Are we seeing that happening again?
Well, let me qualify your question, or take dispute with it. Not all of Afghanistan fell. So the Panshiris, Uzbeks, Tajiks opposed them, and they never had full control of all of it. They did have control over all of the Pashtun regions of Afghanistan. I think what we're going to see, my worst case scenario is this is not the North Vietnamese army marching into South Vietnam in the 70s. We're going to see civil war, and I think it will roughly be Pashtun areas versus other areas. That's the worst case scenario.
David, always so good to get your finessed experience of this complex, dense story on the output. Really good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us here on the News Hour. David Gereshk,
Thanks, Peter.
Joining us from Washington. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.